It's just that Vladimir Putin says that Russia is not his enemy, that Russia is his ally, and that he is going to take American companies to Russia. For what purpose? Because his enemy and his competitor is China. If Donald Trump, President of the United States, who has historically considered Russia his enemy, is now saying that it's an ally, they must stop him at all costs. Indeed, they started the war in Ukraine, which was the pretext for the European Union to break ties with Russia, with the famous sanctions that were supposed to bring Russia to its knees. All they've really done is shoot ourselves in the foot, and then they physically destroyed the Nord Stream. There aren't really drums of war. What we have are drums of poverty. I do think Spain needs to rearm, but not in the way they want. A missile shield to protect us. Does anyone really think Russia is going to launch a missile at Spain? Spain keeps Ceuta and Melilla. Spain has the ability to do something that would make the Panama Canal look like a joke. When Pedro Sanchez goes to Brussels, they call him the one without papers because he arrives without any documents, not due to immigration issues. He doesn't prepare anything. They go with what they're given and told. Spain's problem is exactly what we're discussing. The system lacks selectivity, separation of powers, controlled power, and has excessive spending. And so the function of the state is aimed at interests that go against those of the nation.
Hello everyone, gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of La Factoria. Today we have a very special guest whom many of you will know, Rubén Gisbert. Give a brief introduction for those who don't know you. We're kicking off with a show I'm excited about, given the current geopolitical situation in Europe.
Thank you, Jota, for inviting me to your new project. I hope and wish you the greatest success. For those unfamiliar, I'm a lawyer, and I've spent since I was 18 until now, at 34, I have been studying and training in politics to try to improve our country's political situation.
Yes, that's a topic I'd like to talk to you about at length, about the party system. I share many points with you regarding this rotten system. But really right now, with the situation we're living in Europe in general, and with the warlike atmosphere in the European Union, I'd like to ask you right now, what is your main goal with the protest you held yesterday when it comes to trying to stop this drift toward war? That's not our concern or best interest.
Well, really what we're experiencing, which is something I've been explaining for quite some time. Trump has realized that China, from 2010 to 2022, 2023, and 2024, has dominated the geopolitical space. Commercially, the United States has lost its dominance. If we look at the maps of commercial influence, especially regarding exports, the United States has a prevailing, undeniable position in the world. Until the year 2010, China starts to reverse that. It's a country that doesn't spend as much on defense as the United States, spending around $280,000 million on defense, and the United States spends $860,000. So Donald Trump realizes that really, the paradigm that was built after World War II works during the Cold War era in a world of two blocks. Later, when the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics collapses, it remains and is economically positive for the United States because the 5 largest arms companies in the world, Hitmartin, Boeing, General Dynamics, Groupman, are in the United States. And it's a very important part of the wealth generation of the United States' gross domestic product. But do you realize that really to dominate the 21st century, to dominate trade, it's not about spending a lot of money on defense? It's about controlling raw materials and energy resources and strategically positioning your product in the market better than competitors. That's why they're focused on tariffs, on imbalances, you have to buy from me the same amount that I buy from you, and so on. So, have you realized that NATO is a burden for the United States in that regard when it comes to competing with China? NATO has been a very good tool for the United States to control and dominate the world, so we've always understood that it was about control and domination through force. The hegemony of violence, exactly, control through the capacity for coercion by means of violence. However, China operates differently and has been successful with its approach. And Donald Trump has wanted and wants to change that. So, in order to avoid a major crisis during the transformation that Donald Trump wants to make, he needs Europeans to take on what the United States has been doing so far in terms of cost. In other words, those $400 billion that NATO will stop receiving, if not more, from the United States. They have to be covered by the Europeans. At the same time, our companies have to be relocated and moved to the United States. And at the same time, we have to start buying gas and oil from the United States. By the way, those of us who had been warning that the whole Nord Stream issue and all that was actually because the United States would end up buying the Nord Stream. And in the future, we will end up buying gas and oil from Russia, but paying a royalty to the United States because it will own the infrastructure that supplies us with gas and oil from Russia, which is at the very least
comical. 1 second, we're two people here who understand the topic. I'd like to explain Nord Stream so people can understand it. Let's go back a bit to the origins of this conversation. Russia and Ukraine, this conflict. You were in Donbass, that's when I met you. In the media, it's portrayed as if Putin and Russia are Nazi Germany and Putin is Hitler.
I'm explaining this now to justify an unwarranted increase in defense spending. It's that simple. Currently, there is none. That is, countries invest a lot in defense when they have to guarantee their security, when they feel threatened. Russia does not represent a threat to Europe. It may represent a threat to Lithuania, to Finland, to Lithuania. But not even that, because the paradigm that Vladimir Putin actually puts on the table in Russia to recover a country that is totally ruined, in debt, in a state of decay, a very big crisis. After the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics collapsed, Vladimir Putin begins dismantling nuclear submarines and the fleet, mirroring what Donald Trump wants to do now, reducing military spending that was based on a two-block world. And he starts exporting mainly raw materials and attracting the European market to what he can offer, which is gas and oil. That's the technique Vladimir Putin uses to reduce the debt from 98% to 12%. Which is absolutely incredible. It's a country that doesn't owe anything. He significantly cuts poverty. And well, even though it's a regime where there isn't, let's say...
democracy, no.
There's no democracy, but well, there isn't any here either. Yes, it achieves a series of objectives to economically stabilize the country right now. All this taking into account is...
the Russia that Vladimir A takes over, the Russia in which he finds himself right now? Yes.
After several... Obviously, today's Russia has absolutely nothing to do with the Russia. The events of the year 2000 had absolutely nothing to do with it. In fact, when I went to the war in Ukraine, I passed through Russia and was fascinated. Our perception of Russia is heavily influenced by Soviet-era propaganda and has no connection to reality. Vladimir Putin is a conservative Russian nationalist and an Orthodox Catholic. He has based his philosophy on the teachings of Alexander Dugin. They killed his daughter, by the way, in an attack. Were they going to kill him? As a conservative, what does he seek? Above all, it is to establish, through Russian nationalism of the Russian Federation, which is multi-ethnic, a policy based on Russia's commercial openness. This was because it is not a threat to Russia, in the sense that Russia is not going to take a grain field when it's the counterpart. What it is losing by invading maybe Poland or by invading Lithuania, or what they are telling us is a number of multi-million-dollar deals with all these countries, predominantly with the United States. I mean, if I do business with you, things are going well, we both have our companies, why would I try to mess up your company? It doesn't make any sense. That makes sense in the old order, in which through territorial domination, exploitation, especially through land, agriculture and so on, it made sense. Nowadays it doesn't. Russia is also one of the world's largest holders and exporters of natural resources. It doesn't need it, it has rare earth, it has rare metals. What Russia wants is what the United States has tried in this era to isolate, which is to trade. It's a policy very much based on that of Peter the Great. That's why he made a deal with Germany for Nord Stream 1, then Nord Stream 2. Which, of course, the United States was always obsessed with, and that's why they blew up Ukraine. To take them out, because what they can never allow is a Germany and a Russia united economically, because it would undermine United States political hegemony in the 1990s, 2000s and 2010s.
Let's go back to the origin of the conflict in Ukraine. Many people still don't understand what's happening there. They believe that one day Putin woke up and decided to invade Ukraine just like that. Just like that. I want that territory for myself. There are people, even within my family, with whom I've had certain conversations. It's not that I take one side or the other. I try to
analyze the
things in the most objective way possible. And there are people who still believe that the conflict in Ukraine is solely a conflict about Russian expansionism and imperialism. how would you explain to someone who believes Western propaganda?
NATO supporter. I'll give an example that everyone will understand. Let's imagine that in this regime we have in Spain, the one from 78, which is leading to the breakdown of the nation, is a constant attack on the nation. Finally, although it would be a very big historical mismatch, makes it impossible to create such a nation. But Catalonia achieves its independence through corruption. It achieves its independence. We succeed in overthrowing the regime of 68, leading to its collapse and the establishment of a new political system in Spain. But Catalonia is already independent. Suddenly, many people in Catalonia want to be part of Spain again, now that circumstances have changed. And then elections are held in Catalonia, which would already be an independent country, and a government comes out that is in favor of or supports returning to Spain. Very well. What would happen if suddenly there started to be demonstrations in Catalonia? Violent ones, those demonstrations start happening. Those who protest against that government that wants to restore relations with Spain, they start to take over a square, the Plaza de San Jaume, for example, and there the buildings are controlled by the protesters. Snipers start shooting at the people protesting from those buildings, and there are 100 dead. And that causes the government of Catalonia, which is in favor of good relations with Spain, to fall, and a civil war breaks out. For example, between half of Catalonia, which wants to maintain independence, and the other half. That's literally what happened with Ukraine, with one exception, with a very big difference. In the same way, Ukraine has never been an independent country until 30 years ago. In fact, Ukraine is the founder of what is now Russia. Kiev was the capital of Russia, Rus Kiev exactly. And the Lithuanian-Polish Duchy had a brutal war against the Ukrainians, who were the founders of what would later become the Duchy of Moscow. So is Ukraine existential for Russia? The Orthodox Church establishes a double patriarchy in Russia, religiously, culturally, and politically, which forms the foundation of modern-day Russia. But during the Soviet Union, during the Russian Revolution, it was compartmentalized because Russia has a multi-ethnic reality. It was compartmentalized and done in the most efficient way, let's say, for the Soviet Union. So the region of Ukraine became an oblast, like an autonomous region, what we would understand in Spain as an autonomous community. There you go. Khrushchev, who was from the area in the 1950s, gave Crimea as a gift to Ukraine, even though Crimea had never been a part of Ukraine before. That's why, in 2014, when the hypothetical case I described about Catalonia happened, what happens in Ukraine is that there is a government, the government of Yanukovych, who is a collaborator. It's like the one currently in Belarus with Lukashenko. He gets along very well with Russia, has good relations, and so on. And suddenly a revolution breaks out, a revolution that follows the line of what Obama and Hillary Clinton had already set in motion, with events like the Arab Springs, Tulip Revolution, and Velvet Revolution, the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia. Everything these people set in motion with the aim of destabilizing countries where they had no sphere of influence in order to establish their own influence. Let's remember the lynching of Gaddafi, the war in Syria, just look at how things are now, and so on. And they also thought of doing the same thing in Ukraine, something they already knew would lead Ukraine into a civil war. Because there's a cable from the year 2008, from back then. William J. Barnes, who was the United States ambassador to Russia, literally told them about proposing NATO inclusion in Ukraine. The conflict in Ukraine is now a civil war, not a war with Russia, because they feel Russian. The people of Donbass are Russian. They feel Russian. They speak Russian. Religiously, they belong to the Moscow Patriarchate, so they will never accept that a foreign political structure designed precisely to fight against and weaken Russia is part of their country. They will never allow it, ever. That's why when the Maidan happens, the civil war breaks out. The Maidan is in 2014, the Maidan is 2014, which is the Maidan Revolution. There are 100 dead in Maidan Square, etc. And then the regions of Donbass, Lugansk, Donetsk, the whole eastern area of Ukraine, the whole Russian-speaking area, right? They speak Russian there, yes, but well, in Odessa too, and they're Russian-speaking. I mean, all of Ukraine used to be Russian. Since 2014, Ukrainian nationalism has strongly promoted the use of the Ukrainian language. But Russian is spoken. Zelensky used to speak Russian during his first appearances. The entire eastern region declares independence. In other words, they refuse to join the new government, which they recognize as a coup d'etat that goes against the nation's interests. A question?
Ruben, this question is very important. Do you think this is happening genuinely? Would Ukrainian nationalism have dared to do this if there weren't intelligence agents?
It has been confirmed that the current United States Secretary of Health, Robert Kennedy, has himself stated that the foreign origin is true. $5 billion in United States Agency for International Development funds have been diverted through Victoria Nuland. There's a recorded conversation that everyone can listen to of Victoria Nuland, who was then Secretary of State. With Obama, who exposes from Ukraine, she goes there to define how they will support and finance the insurgents and how they will appoint the new government. And then she's talking to her counterpart in the United States and says, well, isn't this going to be very good for the Europeans? And Victoria Nunes responds, well, fuck you. To hell with the Europeans. We're going to do whatever we want. So, as I was saying, is that independence already there for the eastern regions of Ukraine? And they asked to join the Russian Federation, they asked to join Russia, and then it's Vladimir Putin who tells them, no, I won't accept you into the Federation. I mean, if this narrative, we see that Russia wants to expand, wants to get bigger, wants more territory, then why did he say no? Very simple, because if Vladimir Putin had said yes, it would mean that the most pro-Russian areas of Ukraine would join the Federation, leaving the rest with a majority that would never allow for a fully pro-Russian government within Ukraine. In other words, he wanted to keep it separate and maintain Ukraine's territorial cohesion. He knew this would lead to war with Ukraine, as it did. It could also mean that if Russia
accepted those areas into the Russian Federation, it would immediately be at war with Ukraine.
Yes, exactly, that's right. So you tell them no, but then October 2021 arrives. General Austin from the Pentagon says for the first time, which surprised all of us, that they're going to bring Ukraine into NATO. We know some about the subject. Me, immediately. Well, back in December, I was already saying on my channel, if this keeps going like this, Russia is going to invade Ukraine. No, that's exaggerated and all that, but I'm not saying it from a perspective that's against Russia. Neither in favor. No, look, it's just unacceptable. I know, as they say, that it's existential. Because if that happened, if Ukraine, that's the same case I've mentioned with Catalonia. If Catalonia, for example, in that hypothetical case I mentioned about independence, if it became a power controlled by France or Morocco, would it screw Spain over? It would negatively impact the rest of Spain, which would cease to be Spain. It's almost under Moroccan control. Apologies for the joke. So, Russia can never accept that because it's 20% of its gross domestic product. The trade, exports, and predominant commercial relationship with Ukraine. And obviously, well, in the year 2022, after some unsuccessful meetings between Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, with Biden and Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs, since I don't know, well, the Russians end up giving notice. As Macron recently acknowledged, if an agreement is not reached, if terms are not settled, we don't ask for anything, we don't want control, we want free elections, observer votes, if you want, also free elections. Please don't let them join NATO. We can't allow it. They refuse to talk, claiming there's nothing to discuss. As expected, Russia eventually invades. The propaganda and discourse begin. Then one day, Putin simply loses it, right? He gets heated, his vein pops, and he says he's going to invade Ukraine, which has been totally counterproductive for Vladimir Putin.
I want to clarify that this analysis is not taking sides, but rather a critical examination, independent of the official narrative. This is a description of the facts. Yes, that's the problem, because when I describe the facts too, it's because I'm very aligned with that view. Because I've seen a lecture, I don't know if you've seen it, by Dr. Mersmeyer, who's a professor of geopolitics at the University of Chicago. In 2014, he gave a clear presentation in English. I can send it to anyone who wants it. He discusses the geopolitical situation in 2014, explaining why Ukraine is the West's fault. No invasion had occurred yet. He was saying, gentlemen, if things continue this way, the conflict there will be incredible. And today, was there really no other way out? Let me make a small point for those who wonder if it's really true that the one who invades is always to blame and so on. Well, look, that's an argument that's a bit out of context.
The invasion could have been avoided if there had been the will. That's simple, but by negotiating? Yes, by negotiating simply, hey, don't join NATO. But no, I mean, how could it have been avoided? Ruben, it's very simple. Why do you want to be in NATO? Why do you want to be in NATO?
I'm not Ukrainian.
No, but everyone around here wants to be in NATO. Mainly because it's a security guarantee against Russia, right? I mean, you're in NATO because if Russia attacks you, all the NATO countries will come to your defense. NATO was created to counter the Soviet Union, and that remains its primary purpose. Okay, if Russia is already telling you, let's make a pact, a security guarantee in which I promise never to invade your country. Even to establish that the European Union can have a preferential and special relationship. But, I mean, is the invasion completely ruled out forever, as long as you don't join NATO? Is that it? What's the problem? But that was never the goal. What was sought was exactly what happened. They wanted to provoke a conflict that would build an Iron Curtain, but in reverse, so that the European Union would break relations with Russia, benefiting the Americans and the United States, of course, and harming ourselves, obviously. But keep in mind that in March 2022, just days before the invasion, Nord Stream 2 was already starting to operate. It was being put into operation. What is Nord Stream? For those who don't know, since we've already mentioned it several times here, Nord Stream is a gas pipeline built from Russia, passing through the entire Baltic Sea from St. Petersburg to Germany, that provides cheap gas. It's like a hose, so to speak, actually two hoses, and what they basically do is this. Germany, which is the fundamental pillar of the European Union economically, has been supplied with a very cheap energy source by Russia, and it also establishes, therefore, an economic dependence on Russia, obviously. Of course, that has always been what the English have historically tried to avoid. I mean, a united Russia and Germany is an axis of no English influence over the European continent. That's why they've always tried to keep them opposed. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline was expected to begin operations in March 2022 had it gone into service. Nord Stream 1 began operating in 2014, coinciding with the outbreak of the Maidan protests. If it began operating, it signaled that Germany had started receiving supplies. 65% of its gas, up to 80% of its energy supply depended on Russia. This marked the conclusion of United States political dominance in Europe. They were very clear about that, so they couldn't allow it. That couldn't happen. They had to, as Biden said, they had to stop it. Whatever it takes, we'll do whatever it takes. Indeed, they started the war in Ukraine, which was the pretext for the European Union to break ties with Russia. The sanctions that were meant to cripple Russia have backfired, harming ourselves instead. And then they physically destroyed the Nord Stream.
Alright, they physically destroyed it with an attack. Have they already taken responsibility for it, or is it still up in the air? We all know it was them.
The Polish themselves came out, a Polish deputy himself, although right away he deleted the tweet. He posted the photo of the Nord Stream blown up and writes, "Thank you, United States." Everyone knew it. Obviously, it was the United States. The story that it was some Ukrainians with a boat, a general. Initially, the first version was that it was Zelensky, of course.
I've heard an even funnier version that it was Putin.
No, well, of course, that's what was said at first. Putin blows up Russia's biggest source of income. That's like if I went and cut off my own arm and they say, did he cut it off himself to get sympathy? It's nonsense, it's absurd, but propaganda goes that far. Yes, but nowadays, even the most Atlanticist, the dumbest or the most paid, that's just indefensible. The official version claims that the Ukrainians were responsible. Zelensky rejected an order, but a general became agitated, traveled there with plastic explosives and divers. He doesn't really know. In an area where NATO knows even where every fish moves, it's completely monitored by NATO, plus there's a naval base very close by. Polish? It is well known that the Americans were responsible for what occurred. Nowadays, with 10 billion, which will restart the Nord Stream, there won't be any problem as it's already owned by the United States. In other words, Europe will now be able to buy Russian gas because they'll have to pay the United States, not Russia. I mean, to the...
Both, basically. I mean, we pay
a higher price. Of course, obviously, it's like if you sell peaches and there's a middleman, you have to go through 1 step, 2 steps at least. Exactly, that's it.
And a question, Ruben. How do you fight this propaganda, and how can we confront this drift toward militarism? Because everything you've told us, I think, are pretty accurate facts about what happened and how it happened. And now we're in a situation where we have Ursula von der Leyen practically raising war flags, saying that maybe we have to go fight you.
And I included. Yes, well, that, as I was saying before, is simply to justify. NATO can't be maintained with the cut that Donald Trump is going to make in defense. I mean, it can't be done. And what happens? Now, all the European countries, which means that a significant part of their setup falls apart. Because NATO has meant that Germany spent nothing on defense until now. It's like if you don't spend any money on defending yourself. For a country, that's a huge advantage. Even in Rome, it was often a problem. The primary concern was maintaining the empire's security, as keeping a country safe is crucial. If you delegate that, as done in the United States for 80 years, and focus on making cars and other things, that's fine. But when Donald Trump comes along and says, look, ladies and gentlemen, this is over, it's not just that it's over. It's that Vladimir Putin says that Russia is not your enemy, that Russia is your ally. He plans to bring American companies to Russia for business, and that he will trade the rare metals, gas, and Russian oil himself. Henry Kissinger said China is the enemy and competitor, so it will be for that reason. Super Russian too. Well, the Secretary of State, one of the most pro-American, well, Secretary of State during the Cold War, no more and no less. When they come up with this whole Maidan idea and all that, he says, but what are you doing? This is nonsense. Are you throwing Russia into the arms of China, which is our main competitor? Are you idiots? Indeed, Donald Trump is what wants to reverse that. Obviously, when Donald Trump talks with Vladimir Putin and presents the plan he has for investment and infrastructure in Russia, Vladimir Putin's eyes light up with what he's presenting to him. Many argue that Vladimir Putin would prefer invading a Polish grain field with 2 cows, rather than engaging in significant military action. It's absurd that the United States is investing hundreds of billions of dollars in the country. It doesn't make sense. But the corrupt European elite, which has no project, which doesn't defend anything, only wants to maintain an architecture that was ultimately designed, in the end, a governmental architecture. A governmental architecture. The European Union was founded after the Schuman Declaration on May 9, 1950, which established the European Coal and Steel Community. Year 45. The Nazis fall and the Americans stay, exploiting the Ruhr and Saar regions of Germany and France. From the main energy resource, coal, and the main construction material, steel, the famous European Community of Coal and Steel, is created. So that it wouldn't be, because it was a bit embarrassing. And de Gaulle then said to Truman, hey man, this is too much. You have liberated us, but are American companies here taking things away from us? Our products? The price of freedom, my friend? Exactly, our main resources. And then the European Community is created, and coal and steel, which is the original European Union, which is, in the end, a structure of dominance by the United States and the United Kingdom. I mean, it is created exclusively so that there is a direction for the European countries, away from the Soviet Union, but aligned with the interests of the United States. That remains today, as it's the genesis, origin, root, and what creates it. That's why von der Leyen is going to say, yes, Russia is really bad, but hey, how can you say that? Yes, Donald Trump, President of the United States, historically the one who has set Russia as their enemy, is now saying that it's an ally, that everything they're saying is a lie. They have to maintain it because they want to keep NATO, because they want to keep the European Union. What's your opinion? Well, do you want to continue? No, it's just that there aren't really any drums of war. What there are drums of poverty. That's right, because they're going to put us in debt and increase the tax and fiscal burden just to maintain NATO, to keep the whole racket going.
What is Ruben Gisbert's solution in this situation? What should European countries do to free ourselves from the yoke of that terrible governmental structure that practically...
Is Spain's leadership leading us to poverty? I have a clear idea of what I would do in Spain's situation. I think we need to start investing in the primary sector. We need to start investing. I do think that Spain needs to rearm itself, but not in the way some people want. A missile dome to protect us. Does anyone genuinely believe Russia will attack Spain with missiles? For what reason and against whom? Why? At Gibraltar? Still, but it doesn't make any sense. Spain has to rearm itself, but it has to rearm itself to control its threats, and its threats are in the south, and they are diverse, they are related to immigration, they are the expansionism of a country like Morocco. I mean, it has a series of points, and above all, fundamentally, Spain is a peninsula. Spain has the vast majority of its borders, if not all of them, because theirs, the Pyrenees, are maritime. Spain needs to rebuild a navy. I'm warning you to be cautious, so that Spain can exclusively defend its interest and maintain its independence. So what Spain needs to do is rebuild its navy and establish a strong position in the Strait of Gibraltar. The United Kingdom and United States will never allow certain things. That's why, of course, they would never recognize or defend it. And it's practically just around the corner now. The loss of Ceuta and Melilla. As long as Spain keeps Ceuta and Melilla, it can take action. Laughing at the Panama Canal is like establishing control over the Strait of Gibraltar, which means dominating the Mediterranean's world trade. What do you think will happen with Ceuta and Melilla in relation to the Silk Road that extends to the Atlantic, the United States, and Hispanic American countries? I think there will be a gradual... propaganda suggests that giving in to Moroccan interest regarding it. Will we lose it in the end? I think that, unless it's me, I'm getting everything going as quickly as possible so that there is a sovereignist alternative in Spain that seeks the freedom and independence of Spain. But it's very possible that we're going to do this. We're going to see this from all political forces, because all political forces, all of them without exception, are serving foreign interests. From those directly funded by the United States to those funded by Israel, all of them.
Unfortunately, I don't disagree with what you just said. I'm asked this frequently in my community. Jota, but do you think there's any politician who can save that situation? And I say no. Among the current ones, I don't think so. It's quite complicated.
The only way there is, since you asked me, listen.
I'm talking about the major parties.
Yes. The only way, in my opinion, is to start investing in what doesn't. I mean, let's see. If I live off the money you keep lending me, I can do two things. Either blow it all on partying, which is what these people do, or I can start investing it so that if one day I want to end the relationship with you, I have the ability to be self-sufficient. It's that simple. That's what I would do. In defense, industry, economic, and every other aspect, it can't be that Spain is held back because the European Union says we shouldn't compete with France. By sacrificing livestock, uprooting vineyards, olive trees, and fruit trees. I mean, it's crazy. You're destroying precisely the lung that can give you the ability to breathe if you fall into the water. It's absurd. Of course, that only makes sense because we live in a system designed for corruption.
Totally agree. And why do you think Spanish politicians are so out of touch with the interests of the majority of the population and so aligned with foreign interests? How can we reverse that? Because sometimes I listen to any of the politicians and honestly the only thing I hear is, am I a puppet of whether it's Israel
or the United States? First, they don't know what politics is. They think politics is about ideas. Politics is not about ideas. Politics is interests, and it's the struggle for power. In terms of those interests, you fight, struggle, you enter the fray for certain interests. And obviously, when you understand and study politics and you know how those power relationships work, that's when you can build and avoid what will inevitably lead you to become a puppet or a prostitute. You can't establish a political party using someone else's money. You can't found a party that depends on the political structure you want to change. In the end, even with the best intentions, which I'm sure some Spanish politicians have, there are some who started in politics because they had good intentions, but time has inevitably led them because they didn't know what they were getting into, they didn't really know what game they were playing, to a position where it's really impossible for them to do what they wanted. Because you depend on the one who supports you, and in order to build a political project that is aimed at the interests of the Spaniards can only be supported by the Spaniards themselves. Economically, the party can only be supported by the financing of the citizens themselves.
Wow, Ruben. So there really aren't drums of war like the media tries to make us believe. They just want to get us into more debt. Ursula von der Leyen recently mentioned that Spain has committed to increasing its defense spending, which is currently less than 1%.
No.
Sanchez, as a good servant of the European Union, and I call them the globalist agents, has committed to a 2%, but Ursula von
der Leyen has rejected the 3% proposal, even if it is raised to 20%. This is very simple, but it doesn't matter if it was Sanchez, or if it was Feija or Feiju.
Right.
Or Abascal or Feija. I'm going to tell you why. Very simple. Let's see. When Pedro Sanchez goes to Brussels, they call him the undocumented one, not because of immigration, but because the guy goes without papers. He goes with nothing, without any documents or preparation. They just go with whatever they're given and told. This is very simple. The European Union tells you, look, how do you know this? Sorry, they call him the undocumented one, which I find really funny because I know some European commissioners and some people from Brussels who obviously tell me about it and they laugh, right? With Pedro Bueno, I mean, Spaniards, connected people, those in diplomacy who are there, the undocumented one. Well, the thing is, a little anecdote. Ours is well known. I think it was published at the time with the Next Generation funds. It was published. Well, am I Pedro Sanchez or another politician from Spain? Von der Leyen tells me I must increase defense spending to 3%. And I say to you, and where am I supposed to get the money from, if you're asking me? Plus, you want me to reduce the deficit, reduce spending and all that? I, Ursula von der Leyen, tell you, don't worry, relax. First, fiscal flexibility. What does fiscal flexibility mean? It means that the few limits set by the European Union, the few they set to prevent corruption, as has happened with the Next Generation funds, which were intended for the next generation but have already been entirely spent. I mean, the generation funds are 450 billion that the European Union provides to support and promote the new generation, the generation that's coming. They've already spent the money and now there's nothing left. What's happening? Well, they've started building bridges so that rabbits and goats can cross in Cantabria. Anyway, real things like putting skirts on traffic lights, you know, those kinds of things, right? Well, to avoid these things, there are a series of fiscal mechanisms to make sure you don't overspend, so that the money is managed more or less properly. So no more than half gets stolen during transport, and at least half reaches the destination. And they've said no, that from now on, as long as it's for defense, those controls are eliminated. That is to say, from now on, the Spanish political class won't have any restrictions. They can initiate change, which is no laughing matter, despite my laughter. They'll be able to unleash all their creativity when it comes to justifying debt spending as long as it's for defense. That is to say, ladies and gentlemen, traditional costumes at local festivals will also be included under defense, essentially allowing them to steal freely. And they're basically going to rack up debt, of course, that's it. So, what is Sanchez worried about? If the debt depends on the European Central Bank, it depends on Germany. It's their problem. They've given me money, that's it, which is how Spanish politicians have been doing things. 45 years.
Damn, Ruben, honestly, the situation is pretty bleak. Do you want to give any message of hope? Do you want to say something to the people? What
way out is there? Man, I'm here, I'm moving. I mean, I'm not describing this from a position of generic detachment. I think all of this needs to be identified. The first thing we need to do is stop messing around and lay things out as they are and stop fighting each other. Whether you're a macho, a feminist, or whatever else. And start presenting and addressing these as the real problems we have. Dear friends, dear brothers, and fellow citizens, and from there build an alternative for change. An alternative that must be born from civil society. That's why, in the end, I'm launching a civil political initiative.
Ruben, speaking of political initiatives, you were the president of an association called Junta Democrática, if I remember correctly. That's right, I know a lot of people in there. A shout out to Margot, she's been on my show twice, she's amazing, and also to Darwin's Moth, who's a very good friend of mine. Why did you decide to leave Democratic Board? What was the idiosyncrasy of that association, and why did you decide to leave it?
Well, I haven't left the Democratic Board, I still belong to the Democratic Board. What I have left is the presidency.
Well, tell us, why did you decide
to leave the presidency 5 years ago already? I think that the main line of action and change in this country is civil mobilization. Changing things will be very challenging. What about the ideal scenario? The one that should be set in motion is that a majority and predominant, a prevailing majority part of Spanish society turns its back on this state through not participating in the elections, but also, if necessary, through tax resistance, general strikes. And that needs to be organized and unified. It needs to be unified. As I said before, with civil organizations that are non-state, when we talk about civil organization, we always mean what is not state-run. State-run means supported by the government's public sector. It will consistently defend the state's interests, similar to state unions like workers' commissions, Sujetes, and Solidarity. In essence, state-funded unions will never oppose the state, as they depend on its financial support for their existence.
supports them?
It's obvious. In fact, unions and parties are born precisely as civil groups, to oppose the state, to fight against the state. So, the Democratic Junta brings together what was a convergence of political forces after Franco's death. And in the end, or the change that was supposed to happen in Francoism, they wanted a political break with Francoism. They wanted Francoism to have a door that would close and another door to open where something new would be established. A system. much better than that of the United States, but based on the same foundations of political freedom. That it would be a direct election of political representatives, a limitation of control, direct appointment, free justice, etc. The event was attended by a diverse group including monarchists, Juan Carlos's father Don Juan de Borbón, Rafael Calvo Serrer, and members of Opus Dei. Torquato Fernandez Miranda, pardon me, the Carlists and everyone else were present. Obviously, it was the United States, again with Kissinger and those who were in power at the time. Torquato Fernandez Miranda, Herrero de Miñón, the Francoists, and above all with a socialist party that was created ad hoc and promoted ad hoc, with Felipe González, through German social democracy, with Billy Brandt and Edmund Smith, to carry on a transition, as Torquato called it, from law to law, from what had been Franco's regime, but multiplying it and establishing an oligarchy of parties. So the Democratic Junta died. It died because the goals it had set were not achieved. Therefore, 5 years ago, the civil association that I created, gave it the same name, because it is what remains unfinished. And in the 70s, an attempt was made to transition from a dictatorship to a democracy, but due to lack of experience, it hasn't happened yet. I started that initiative and association.
Very important. Ruben, did you say Kissinger again? Did we not succeed with those ideas of the Democratic Board because of foreign interference, as always?
Yes, that was in the WikiLeaks. In fact, the original founder of the Democratic Board, Antonio García Trevijano Forte, was an advisor to Don Juan de Borbón, an exceptional lawyer and jurist ostracized in this nation for championing the principles of liberty, at a time when lies prevailed. The WikiLeaks papers come out and he is portrayed as that. So they call him a maverick. Maverick in English slang, in English, no. In English it is an independent, that is this guy, we can't
control him, of course.
We don't really know what he's about. And faced with the risk of an organization in which the Communist Party could gain strength because Santiago Carrillo and the Communist Party were also there, they preferred to use the Socialist Party together with the Francoists and agree on a transition to a model like the one they had set up in Italy, like the one they had set up in Belgium, which is the party state. Henry Paul Spaak explains this very well in his memoirs, Unfinished Struggle. He is a Belgian, the first Secretary General of NATO, who establishes how. After the fall of Nazism, the United States installs governments that are very easily controlled by foreign powers. They adopt a 19th century model from the 1800s, the same one the United Kingdom used for its colony, Australia, which is a non-elective regime, a system where citizens vote but do not choose, and it's the proportional system. It was invented by an Englishman in the 19th century. Take Roy Hill, give the king to his father for Australia, Roy Long Hill, and support him with your army. And that system is the one the Americans take and put here. And it's the system we have, where you vote for lists made by different parties. You vote by identification, right? These are the patriots, these are the feminists, these are the liberals, these are the I don't know whats. And what you're really doing with that is going to an election thinking you're making a decision, when what you're actually doing precisely is the exact opposite. That's what the voting system is invented for, which is to choose. Voting to vote. It's invented so that a candidate is designated and later a representative, and that representative represents, acts on behalf of the people, of those who have chosen him, which has to be the constituency, that is the group that has chosen him. Similar to congressmen, senators, assembly members, or deputies who are elected, the deputy here represents their party. No, not even that. To the boss, who is the one that put him on the list, that's why he does what the boss tells him. And that's why it's such an easy system to control, because an external power only has to control the 3 or 4 bosses of each party. The entire structure relies on them. That's it. The Constitutional Court, Supreme Court, High Court of Justice, Congress of Deputies, absolutely everything. Stop putting yourself in the way.
In a position, imagine that. Okay, I'll give an example. One that I like. Isabel Díaz Ayuso rebels against Feijóo. Feijóo, would he have the means to remove her from the Community of Madrid as party leader?
Yes, he could try, but let's see. It was actually something that, for example, Pablo Casado tried. And they didn't set him up, it didn't work out for him. Here we delve into another harmful aspect of that system, the autonomous state, which is how, little by little, what was conceived by an idiot, Adolfo Suarez, who took 8 years to finish his law degree because he was a real one. According to his political associates, he was unintelligent. He had a distinct way of speaking, and the king chose him. And an image has been built, but he wasn't an intelligent guy, he was a clever guy. Torquato Fernandez Miranda lost patience with him, so he left. We're totally going along with what he came up with, which was the autonomous state, under what is known as the popular term coffee for everyone. Why was this phrase used? In a Madrid cafe called Cafeteria José Luis, they began meeting secretly to draft the current Spanish constitution. And the Basque nationalist separatists, the Catalans, started to ask, hey, I want this, I want that, I want the charters, I don't know how many things. And then in the end, since he got fed up with it, Adolfo Suarez said, well, look, coffee for everyone the same, and that's it. What does coffee for everyone mean? To create the possibility for everyone to have autonomy, a transfer of the powers that should belong to the nation, to the state. That never existed in Spain. It was an invention created at that moment, but that would be a separate issue. And that has been gaining strength. Those consolation prizes have been gaining strength and become very important structures within each party, within the Spanish party state. That's why it's often necessary for the leader of a party to rely on the regional leaders in order to reaffirm that position of power he has. That's why it wouldn't be so easy, but he could do it. Or
I mean, basically what the party system does is, as you've explained perfectly, turn a country into a slave to foreign interests. So,
the solution proposed by the Democratic Junta, how would it prevent that? Oh, let's see. The Democratic Junta is an association that seeks to mobilize citizens so that it reaches a point where government action becomes inoperative. In other words, Spaniards must take to the streets and mobilize to the point of disruption. How was India's independence achieved, or civil rights for black people in the United States? Through civil mobilization. Since I believe that's a path that will take time, but it's the main one. I've decided to set another path in motion, one that I've never wanted to start. I've never been part of any political party. I've never been active anywhere. I could have gotten into politics years ago, as I've received many offers from various places.
Ruben? Question. One of the leitmotifs the Democratic Board has. One of the main, let's say, causes they support is not voting. Abstention, not voting actively, active abstention. Because that would delegitimize the current government, right?
The lack of massive participation at the same time as action, so that's why it's active abstention with public demands, makes those demands more legitimate than the government that will repress them. Because that government has support, for example, from 40 or 30%, and it's not qualified. In other words, it lacks legitimacy and majority citizen support to act against a social uprising. This triggers an inevitable chain reaction causing the system's collapse, as argued by Antonio Garcia Trevijano. That's what the Democratic Junta defends, and what I believe should continue as a predominant line of action.
And you, as a former president of the Democratic Junta, are you now going to run in the elections? So how do those two things fit together?
This is not about voting or not voting. That's why they've tried to stigmatize the Democratic Board. And they've tried to stigmatize those of us who fight for freedom and democracy in Spain. I want to set that aside because there's a prior element that's needed, which is cultural hegemony. Expand on that a bit. Cultural hegemony means being hegemonic, that everyone in Spain culturally has internalized it for themselves. Politically, what's the problem? The problem isn't that Spain is right-wing or more fascist or feminism or fundamentalism or Venezuela. Those are things that parties throw out so people will argue and go vote. The issue we're revealing is Spain's problem. It's that it has a system that isn't selective, that doesn't have separation of powers, where power isn't controlled. The spending is excessive. And therefore, the function of the state is directed toward interests that are contrary to those of the nation. Spain faces these issues, making it challenging to implement changes without addressing them first. Why am I explaining this? When you tell people there's no democracy in Spain, they're surprised and confused. What are you saying? How dare you say there's no democracy? No, look, democracy is a representative elective system. When you vote and you explain all this about the list, they end up understanding it. There are a lot of people who say, damn, it's true. Well, so what do? Then, when you tell them not to vote, people tune out. People don't believe. We've lost so much in this country that we've even lost confidence in ourselves as a nation. People doubt that the Spanish majority will protest and revolt to overthrow the government. They find it inconceivable.
Spaniards only win when they win the Euro Cup, or when Real Madrid wins the Champions League, or Barcelona does.
So I wanted to set in motion a reformist path with a guarantee, which is the same one I've upheld while I've been president of the democratic junta. And what that reformist path does is that, do you agree that Spain has to change? Not just people, but the system and the regime. Yes, okay. What do you disagree with? I don't agree with going out into the streets, protesting, not voting. Very well. The focus of the discussion has shifted from voting to whether or not to change the system. That is the crucial point. That's why I've wanted to set this path and this alternative in motion. Because now the discussion is no longer about voting or not voting. Whoever doesn't want to vote and whoever sees that path as the one that should prevail shouldn't vote, but should take action. Whoever wants to pursue reform through the path I'm setting in motion will have that option. But deep down they will know that what needs to change in Spain is the regime, system, and political structure. It's no longer about ideology, it's about dignity. To say, no, I want my country to be governed by a clean political system, so that's what we have to achieve. That's what we have to forge. And that's why I consider, at a certain point, that even though many people, my detractors, said that I had founded the democratic junta to have an ivory tower there, like an unattainable intellectual watchtower where I'd remain forever. I resign as president because it's incompatible with being president of that association. At the same time, I start a reformist path through the system. That's true. Which is infinitely more
harder, but it's true that it has generated a lot of contradiction in many people. Your position regarding many people who followed you in the democratic junta, they would say, okay, Ruben has consistently supported abstention.
And I continue to advocate for abstention.
But at the same time, are you going to ask people to vote for you?
No, I haven't said when anymore.
I'm going to ask people to vote for me. You're not going to ask people to vote for you.
So you're going to run in an election? Let's see. I'm going to run in an election where I'm going to explain that this is Spain's problem. And you have two options. Either vote or not vote. I prefer that you don't vote, but instead take action. Go to a protest, go to the door of Congress on election day and show that there is no democratic system in Spain. You want to vote now. Do you not believe in this alternative? Do you have this alternative? What guarantees do we offer them? That we are not going to touch a single euro from the state and that we come with our homework done. We're neither adventurers nor unprepared, unlike Alvise and his group. Damn, don't go after Alvise. I mean, because Alvise makes a copy. He mentions Partido Gracia without understanding it. He'll have to visit someday.
Alvise, you know.
What? Look, I'm gonna say it on the podcast. He will never come.
It makes me really sad that...
I don't feel sorry at all.
Let me tell you what makes me sad. I've told you many times already, behind the scenes, in private. That many young people that, in a way, we have that longing to restore Spain's dignity and for Spain to become an important geopolitical player again. Spain is not a corrupt nation. That includes you, the Vice President, Roberto Vaquero, and myself. There are many things I don't agree with. Maybe there are things I don't agree with the Vice on. Maybe there are things I don't agree with Roberto on. And at the end of the day, together we would be stronger and could change the system if that's our aim.
But there's one thing there that you don't see. And it's that you have to know how to tell the difference. The people who take action because they want to change things, and the people who take action to get rich. And don't you realize that the Vice President, as has been discredited and exposed, that's why I've gone from one party to another. Where they have... He was kicked out for doing something foolish in his own political experiment, in addition to being unintelligent.
I wouldn't like him to talk about you like that either, so let's leave it at that. No, well...
He did it. He was recently on a podcast saying that I'm a mediocre lawyer, and I don't... I'm not opining, just revealing his actions. He talks about partyocracy, but he doesn't define what partyocracy is. That is, he doesn't propose a political alternative. I'm not going to judge him personally because I don't know him. I'm not insulting him. I'm saying he's a guy who got caught telling someone, hey, give me 100,000 euros, and then if I have the ability to influence, I'll favor you. That's corruption. Whether we like it or not.
Whether we want to or not, I won't defend that action, as I think it was clumsy. But Alvise, like, whenever I follow him on Telegram for extended periods, he has consistently been someone who... He has supported cryptocurrencies for the liberalization. Damn, liberalization. Sometimes I get stuck. For the liberalization of that market When he says he'll help that person for the 100,000 euros, he's likely referring to that sector. And he always has
defended it. And
What about Punta Cana? What about Punta Cana? Excuse me?
ask him. Go on. No. The one who went to Punta Cana with Israel Dorado and some other people, you ask him.
Well, me, Ruben, me. Politics is not my thing, no, not me.
It's not my thing, but I must be clear about who the enemies are, not mine, as I try to have few enemies since I already have many. I must always distinguish between deception and lies. I have nothing personal against Vice. On the contrary, I've tried to approach him in every possible way, and he has always avoided me, because he's cloth held up by two sticks. The Vice will never come over to debate politics with me. That's not going to happen, unfortunately, because I would love that.
Honestly, I'll do what I can to make that happen.
You won't be the first or last, but
I just happen to get along very well with both of them, so, well,
for me, there comes a point when I tell you seriously, it lacks El Tio, who said that I got mad at him because he didn't put me on his list. But how could that be true? How am I supposed to go anywhere with that guy? Nowhere? That's for starters. And second, I've never talked to him. You've never spoken in person? In fact, I wanted to talk to him, but that's because I need 5 minutes talking to someone to know what they're about. You have a great relationship with Roberto, right? And Bova, I also have an excellent relationship with him. Luis Maria Pardo from Justicia Europa was at the protest yesterday too. In fact, it's the opposite. What I want is to come together. I announced this in May. We're in May of last year. I've spent 6 months trying to get this political initiative going without me being the one in front. And I don't want to because I know what it's going to mean, and I don't know if I'm willing. I know I'm willing, but I know what it's going to mean. The thing is, the people I want to be in this project, they've made it mandatory that I lead it in order to be part of it. Well, it's not that I want to be a martyr, but fine, I'll do it. But that's why it's taking me so long. Besides, they're even giving it away in the middle of everything. I seek unity and to bring people together. However, I won't join those who don't share my values and principles.
We'd need to check if our values don't align. I'm not referring to you specifically.
No.
Yeah, but me. I really want to believe maybe I'm a bit of an idealist.
That you're a good guy?
I've seen you and I know you're a good... I'm a bit of an idealist and it makes me sad. These little quarrels between people I admire and care about.
I have no quarrel with the Vice, I repeat.
Forgive me for saying this, Ruben, but it seems like you do. And I think he feels the same about you. Honestly, I think it's both of you.
No, I don't have any quarrel at all. I'm telling you the truth. It's nothing personal. He's a guy I don't even know. If you asked me about Abascal, Ayuso, or Feijo, you wouldn't like what I have to say.
Personally, I think I make a very clear distinction between Alvise and Vox because Alvise wasn't born as a hegemonic party like Vox. At the end of the day,
I know
perfectly well who he went to visit. He went to see Netanyahu, and we all know that there was a lot of money involved in that visit. Personally, it's not that I don't support Israel. I don't get involved in geopolitical matters that aren't mine. But what I do say is that I believe Vox is an entity of Israeli intelligence here. But it didn't start like that, right?
in the end, everyone follows the same path, but not because it depends on their desires, it depends on other factors, as I mentioned earlier. Because they don't know what they're getting into. I know what I'm getting into. That's why I already have to go with a bodyguard. There are certain things, like someone breaking in to steal my computer.
To my house. He came with an armored car. Guys, I realized it. What, you think I didn't? I shot him a couple of times just now while he was in the bathroom. No, I'm kidding.
Vox was founded by people I believe are honest. Alejo Vidal Quadras is an honest guy. I know him. I
have a lot of respect for Alejo Vidal Quadras.
And what happens is that these are projects that, well, we are involved in. Failing to address the root cause of an issue will always result in being misled, as previously explained. In the case of Alvise, I repeat, I don't have any quarrel with anyone, much less with him, because I don't even really know him. He hasn't done anything to me. His nonsensical remarks about me actually work in my favor, as it's the only way he can attack me. To try to discredit me, I mean things that not even my worst enemies would say, like that I'm a mediocre lawyer or that I have no education. A person who doesn't even have a party structure.
I don't consider you mediocre at all. This is...
Quarrel?
I don't think it's necessary, honestly. There's a person who said things on my podcast that I didn't agree with at all, okay? His name is Samuel Vidal. I don't know if you know him, Samuel Vidal. Yes, well, Samuel Vidal has a plan called the Orchestra Plan. It's about uniting the largest communities in Spain.
And through
that union, make me part of this system. I believe that everyone fighting their own individual battles is selfish. If we all come together,
Yes, okay, I think I already know who it is. Yes, but well, it's something I'm already doing. I've already met with Luis Maria Pardo and Roberto Vaquero. I will meet with anyone who truly has an interest in changing things in this country. I will offer my platforms with many followers. So that, I'll say it again, I've met with all these people because I want to do that. And your friend Albis? Because I see it's a matter of friendship. I understand and respect that. It's just that I have a lot of honor. He supported me when I was down, and I get it. But also because it would be good for him. In that specific case, I offered it to Albis. I don't offer it to him anymore, obviously. But I offered it to him many times, just like I offered it to them. To sit down and talk with you, to see what you want to do. And he never wanted to. And he never wanted to, obviously, because there's nothing behind it, in my humble opinion. I don't need to say... there's nothing beyond that. No plan, no course of action. The audios that were supposedly going to bring down Pedro Sanchez are nowhere to be found. And the raffle, what happened with the raffle? Is it being given to the victims of Valencia? Well, I know, but he'll have to explain it and he'll have to show it. He's the one who made that commitment, but that's all. There's nothing really solid nor, in my view, serious, because we're talking about something as serious as changing the political structure of the country. The political structure of the country. And also, not only does it require a good program with everything very well specified and clearly defined, but also a team and a group of people. In some cases, you must know how to position those who are better than you, as I'm attempting in my situation.
Ruben, let me conclude with a brief point we should have discussed earlier. The meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Okay, Zelensky, sorry, what's your opinion? There's a chance that I'm not sure if you uploaded it, but I watched the entire interview in which one is completely embarrassed and the other is kind of smiling. To what extent do you think that meeting with Zelensky achieved its goal of blowing everything up?
I'm unsure if that was the objective. As I must say that Donald Trump is a master of communication. Donald Trump knows very well and he knows very well. He has been on air for 10 years, on a primetime show on television. And I already suspect that it's very likely that confrontation was staged. It was also...
encouraged. Look, in the higher circles, you can expect anything, honestly.
So it wouldn't surprise me. It was necessary for that to happen so that Zelensky, since the meetings were already scheduled beforehand, could come to Europe and Europe could build the narrative that nothing is happening. We stand against Russia because who does that benefit? It benefits the United States. Now Zelensky. Ultimately, he just wants a golden retirement, which they're already offering. That benefits the United States because it keeps NATO going and makes it cover 50% of the opportunity cost of cutting 50% of defense spending. Is the European Union going to cover it? Without Zelensky's role in that meeting on Friday, it would not have been possible to explain to the public the chain of events that followed.
Honestly, that was a very good answer. Ruben, is there anything else you want to say to the audience? I think we can consider the program concluded now. It has been intense, it has been brief, but I think it was necessary. Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, the only thing I would say to your audience is that beyond whether they liked or didn't like what I said, or whether I inspire empathy or antipathy. The only thing I want them to think about is that beyond their personal sensitivity, they should be clear about what needs to change in this country. It's not about colors, it's not about people, it's about whether you agree with what you've heard, the system, find your way, find your path. If you didn't like me, look for something else. But we have to start building an awareness that we need to change the basic aspects of the system that prevent us from defending our interests.
All right, Ruben, I'm going to say clearly that my heart greatly influences me. However, I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to ensure this country's future, which I believe is uncertain. If we don't all push, in a certain sense, in the same direction, and I totally agree that the problem with this country isn't just putting one person in and replacing another. I think obviously things would go better with some than with others, but at the end of the day, it's a systemic problem that stems from its origin and roots. And my intention is to use all the communicative ability I have to wake up as many people as possible. I'm gonna say a phrase that my father wrote to me a long time ago. My father is the one who woke me up to all this political matrix and so on. And he said to me, son, We are up against a mechanism so strong and so powerful that a single grain of sand will never be able to make it break down. But many grains of sand, many sacks and sacks and sacks and sacks of sand will make it possible to stop this diabolical mechanism.
So,
My mission in this world, Ruben, and I think yours is pretty aligned too, is to add more grains to the sack.
my mission is to take down the system, or at least not let it take me down. I must stop it. I desire a new system without destroying the existing one. That's not my motivation. I don't want destruction for the sake of destruction. We want to build something better. I want to actually build. And I also think that everyone who truly wants to, because I could be wrong, everyone who truly wants that, in the end, we will meet. On that path, we will meet.
I hope that's the case. Ruben, a pleasure, guys. Now I'm going to do the exclusive interview for the community, for anyone who wants to join the private community. You already know that you have the link below in the description. All the questions I'm going to ask are from my community. They're yours. So you know, guys, link in the description. Whoever wants to join, there it is. Thanks for coming, Ruben. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed the show. Until next time, a big hug.